Welcome back, everyone. In this lesson, we are going to continue to work on our Pizza Times application, where we, of course, have wired up this pretty cool toggle functionality. We have built a toggle web interaction component. We've added some animation as well as some accessibility ARIA attributes in the last lesson. And in this lesson, we're going to show how we can take this toggle component that we have built and apply it to a completely different type of web interaction. Just sort of demonstrating how, by building these web interaction components in a very generic way, they can be applied in many different scenarios. So in this case, what we're actually going to do is we're going to create a very annoying pattern. So first of all, I'm going to throw up the obnoxious alert. There's going to be some obnoxious stuff we do in this lesson. And what I mean by that is we're going to build a very annoying dismissible. And this dismissible will appear when the page first loads. It's going to be sort of fixed to the bottom of the screen and overlaying the bottom of our app. And it's going to say something about how you have, by using this website, you agree to our terms of service or something really obnoxious like that. And we'll be able to click an X button to dismiss this. This is something you're going to see all over the place in modern websites. That really drives me crazy. I think they're awful, but nonetheless, it is a pattern that we use in web applications, this idea of a dismissible. It doesn't have to be for this specific purpose. You could have alerts that are dismissible or just anything really. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of HTML to add some content. We're going to style it up a bit, and then we're going to use our toggle web interaction component to actually wire up the functionality without changing that toggle at all. So let's start inside of our HTML file. We're going to need some new HTML that's going to compose the content for this particular thing that we're going to be adding. So I'm going to go all the way to the bottom here, and right before our /main tag, I'm going to add a couple new lines here, and we will add a new div with a class of super annoying legal disclaimer, like so. And then we'll just put some dummy content in here, like, I don't know, hi there. We'll put in a paragraph that says, by dismissing this obnoxious disclaimer, you agree to let us do pretty much anything we want. Thanks a lot, lawyers everywhere. So no offense to lawyers, but I do think this is a very obnoxious thing that we now have to do on websites where you have some sort of obnoxious disclaimer, but maybe that's just me. Maybe you guys love them. Maybe you guys love it when you go to a website and you say, yes, I get to dismiss a disclaimer that I'm not even going to read. Maybe that's good usability. I don't know. So that's just my opinion. But now that we have some HTML content here, we obviously need to kind of position this so it appears as if it's covering up the content we actually want to see on the page, because we want this to be as obnoxious as possible. So I'm going to copy this class right here, super annoying legal disclaimer. We'll go into our app SAS file, and at the end of this file, right after our screen reader only class that we created in the last lesson, we'll add a dismissible disclaimer section. And this is going to contain that class, which we will set to position absolute, bottom 0, left 0, right 0. And if we save that, so that's actually positioned according to the page. So we need to make sure that our, looks like app frame. So you'll see this div right here is actually what sets up the frame for our application. We need to make sure that's position relative. So let's add that. App frame position relative. And that will put our disclaimer down here at the bottom. Let's give it a background color of lighter. Gives it a background. Let's add some padding. Maybe we'll increase that to 25. That looks pretty good. To make it appear as if it's on top of other stuff, we should probably add a box shadow, and we can do kind of a negative on that y-axis. So this is x-axis position, y-axis will be -4 pixels. The blur will be 8 pixels. And when I'm in SAS, I usually use transparentize, which is an awesome word to say. But not only that, but you can see you can actually take a CSS color or a SAS variable for a color. So in this case, I can maybe take our darker color from the config.sas file that's up here, and we'll transparentize that by 80% or 0.8. So it'll actually leave it so that it is only 20% opaque and it'll be 80% transparent. And when we save that, you'll see it just adds a bit of a shadow above our little dismissible that we created there. And then finally, we probably don't need a bottom margin on the paragraph, so we'll add paragraph margin 0 right here. So it just shrinks the size down a bit. And let me just order these real quick so our linter is happy. And we have kind of a dismissible there. I would even say we could do a transparentize on the background color so you can kind of see, just to reinforce the idea that this is overlaid on top of other content. So maybe, and this would be really small, maybe only like 10%, maybe even less than that, maybe 5%. But you can see just very subtly the text behind it is sort of appearing here. So you can kind of see that there's some content behind this panel that's now placed over top of our app. And that's looking pretty good at this point. So what we really want to do is within this dismissible component that we're building, we want to have kind of an X or a close button at the top right so that when people read it and our lawyers are happy that we place this obnoxious thing on top of our app, they can hit the X button because they, of course, don't care about what it says. And it's going to dismiss this actual dismissible here that we're placing in. So we will, of course, do that through a button because just like any sort of click event that occurs, most commonly you're going to use an HTML button to actually serve as the trigger element for that particular interaction. So in this case, we will do button class equals close. And then we will add the times symbol or the times character inside of there. And you'll see what that looks like is right here. We just add a little X button. And then we can just take in our CSS file and kind of style up that close button really quickly to make it appear so it's not such an ugly button on top of there. We could do down here close button. If we scroll down a bit, we'll do .close. First of all, let's take away the background. So background transparent, and then that's a white text. So we need to change the foreground color to something like medium. And as I save, you can kind of see this refresh. We need to take away the box shadow, which is currently adding that bottom sort of border there. So we'll say box shadow is none. And that takes that away. Let's increase the font size to like 20 pixels. Or we can go even bigger, 24 pixels, so the X is a little more visible. I can see there's some text shadow. Might be kind of hard to see there, but if you zoom in here, you see that little text shadow to the bottom right of the X. We can easily enough take that out. We'll just do text shadow is none. And finally, we will position that at the top right of our dismissible itself. So we'll do position absolute, top 0, right 0, and that will move it up to the top right of our dismissible. And then we should probably take out the hover style as well. And I think it's actually hover and focus. Yeah, you'll see when I switch keyboard focus to that. And you could tell this by selecting the element, and then you could come up here to the hoverable thing to change the element state. But you'll notice that that background color comes from both the hover pseudo class, so hover, as well as focus. So we'll need to override both of those in this case, and that's going to look like this. We'll do hover and focus. Background color is going to be transparent. And then let's just make sure that looks good. And to give it, because we've kind of taken away the hover state, it looks very static right near it. We could even do like a color primary on focus or on hover. So we just get a little bit of a blue highlight on the text itself when we hover over that. And I think that looks pretty good. So let me order these CSS properties up here. And we have a nice little close button that does absolutely nothing at the moment, but we've styled it up. We have our dismissible in place, and we now have a trigger button that will actually allow us to click on that and remove this dismissible. So whenever you're doing this, you may find yourself saying, well, this is entirely a new component. This is a dismissible. We don't have a dismissible web interaction component that we have built. And you may find yourself going out, building a whole other sort of separate JavaScript file called dismissible.js. You implement the functionality there, and then you implement that into your app using a whole new web interaction component. But we've already built a toggle component that's sort of handling this functionality. And if you think about it, if you think about what a dismissible is you're basically just dismissing it by clicking on this X button. You're essentially just dismissing an element or toggling it off. So it's almost like a one-way toggle. If you can think about it that way, which in which case our current toggle component could actually be applied to that. And so rather than building a whole separate component just to handle dismissibles, we could simply instantiate another instance of our toggle class, configure it to maybe have some more dismissible specific configuration options, and then actually use that as the method to do this without having to duplicate any code. Because again, all we're doing is just toggling. In this case, it's just kind of the opposite. Rather than toggling something on and then back off, in this case, it's already active when the page loads, and we're only doing a one-way toggle. So we're just toggling off whenever you click on the button, and then it doesn't come back again. So very easily what we could do is inside of our app.js file, let's create a new instance of our toggle. This will be dismissibles, and we could say const dismissibles equals new toggle. And we'll, in this instance of toggle, we'll give it a new attribute name, and maybe we'll call it data dismiss. It will actually be a toggle, but we're actually going to give this, whoops, I forgot my curly brackets there. We're going to give this its own instance of that toggle class. And if you look at the configuration of our toggle class, we have the attribute name, but we also have toggle container is kind of specific to that .toggle class. So maybe we can set a custom option for that as well. We could set toggle container to something like dismissible. Whoops, dismissible, like so. And then now that we've set this separate instance of that, and we have this data dismiss data attribute and this dismissible toggle container, we just need to update our HTML a bit, and we're going to get the same functionality that we had before. So as an example, we could just simply surround this in div.dismissible, like so, and we'll tab all this over. So that's our toggle container that we just set. And then the button itself, we will set to data-dismiss, and then it needs to be some selector. And just like our previous toggle, it's going to go up to its parent toggle container, which in this case is going to be dismissible. And we can basically just select, that. Or sorry, it'll have to be a query selector. So it's dot super annoying legal disclaimer. And whenever we save this, you'll notice if we inspect the HTML of our dismissible here, and you notice right here on this line, the super annoying legal disclaimer, when I click on the X, it's going to add active. When I click on the X again, it's going to take it away. So we've essentially duplicated that functionality, but we have a new data attribute and we have a new toggle container class. So we're really just reconfiguring the same functionality. And in order to get this to work and actually toggle the display of that element, we're going to do the same thing we did before, where in our app.sas file, we'll go to our super annoying legal disclaimer class, and we'll simply say, when this does not have a .active class, then display none. So that's going to hide it by default. And you'll see when I refresh, that is going to cause it to disappear by default. And that's obviously not what you want with a dismissible. You want it to show up until it is dismissed, which means that in the default state of this, whenever it is first loaded, we'll also have to add active. So it's on by default, and you'll see there, as soon as we add that, it disappears. I can click on the X to actually dismiss it. And we're not quite done here because we want to make sure that we also have our accessibility attributes in place. So again, if you notice in the DevTools up here, when you dismiss this, it adds aria expanded equals false. So we want to make sure that initially aria expanded is equal to true, because again, it is expanded or it is open by default. And so now you'll see aria expanded is true. When we click on the X, that switches to false, and then we remove the active class from our super annoying legal disclaimer, and we've basically created a dismissible. By using this pattern, I can now create as many of these as I want just by adding a dismissible container somewhere and then setting this data dismiss attribute and our ARIA expanded equals true. It's going to be super easy for me to reuse this in as many places as I'd like. And while we're implementing some accessibility attributes into this, we've added our ARIA expanded. Again, you always want to think about a screen reader or a visually impaired user's experience. In this case, we have the text times within the button itself, which probably isn't very descriptive whenever a screen reader is actually going to read the function of this button. So what is probably a better solution in this case is let's add an indentation inside of the button here, and we will add span ARIA hidden equals true, and that can have the times inside of it. So that's going to be visual content, but it's hidden to screen readers. So ARIA hidden equals true. And then we'll create alternate content within this button. Span class equals SR only. So this will be visually hidden, but it will be read by screen readers. And in this case, we can say something descriptive like dismiss this totally obnoxious legal disclaimer. And there we go. So we have not changed the presentation of our button at all, but obviously in the HTML, now that we have hidden the times itself and we've added this screen reader only text, this is going to be a lot more clear to visually impaired users that are using our application. When they change the keyboard focus to that, it's going to read the screen reader text as the function of that button. And if they hit the enter key, just like anyone else that's using the application, they can very easily dismiss that dismissible alert that we've now placed over top of our application. And just like you've seen with the dismissible, our very simple toggle web interaction component is applicable in a lot more scenarios than what first seems like appropriate. And specifically, you can basically take this same pattern of a toggle and you could apply it to all sorts of stuff. And that may include a drop-down menu, an accordion menu, accordion panels or tab panels, even a modal dialog. All of those web interactions are very, very different in their presentation. So the CSS is very different, but the functionality and the actual JavaScript web interaction is basically a trigger button that toggles classes on a target element. And that's basically all they boil down to is all of those things are all kind of this same toggle functionality. And that's actually really great because us as developers and JavaScript developers of this application can really focus on maintaining a very small set of code inside of our application that's going to be used in a wide variety of scenarios. It's going to make it easier to maintain. It's going to make it a lot less error prone because we have a smaller amount of code to actually fix and a smaller amount of code that could potentially cause issues. And it's going to be a lot easier to work with when other people jump into the solution and they try to read through the code. They're not reading through 50 different components that we have built and reading through, oh, these are tabs, these are accordions, these are drop downs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have a very simple toggle class. It controls everything. And most of the differences between all of those components is going to be presentation, which is mostly CSS. And if you haven't noticed, I'm a big fan of CSS. I really like doing CSS. So if this course so far is a lot more presentation heavy than what you expected, I think that kind of goes to show you that web interaction and building visual components that are interactive in your application does actually require quite a bit of CSS like we did in this lesson to be able to accomplish, because the interaction is usually quite simple until we get to some more advanced stuff like drag and drop and some stuff that really does get quite a bit more complex and maybe isn't so heavy on the CSS. Until we get there, our JavaScript's basically just toggling these classes on and off, and everything else is CSS. So it's definitely something you want to spend time on. You want to practice. You want to become familiar with the basics of CSS, positioning and animations and the box model and all of that stuff is just such an essential skill when developing and building your web application. So we're going to have a lot of practice doing that in upcoming lessons where we're going to use our toggle class that we've created. We are going to implement that into a whole new starter solution. And we're going to start to add some new features to that toggle component that we have built to support some perhaps more advanced interaction patterns that you might expect to see from a lot of those components that I mentioned. So stay tuned. Keep your toggle class that you've built handy, because you will want to copy and paste that in future lessons. And we will be excited to get started and see how else we could adapt the same script and the same component to do all sorts of neat things very shortly.